We'll move on to question number 3, please.
Hi, my name is Michael and I'm from Get Together. And my question is, disabled people like myself often face barriers in entering and staying in paid employment. How will you ensure there are opportunities for disabled people to access employment and build on their careers?
Carolyn, this keeps coming up as well.
Yeah.
53% of people with a disability is in employment, and that's compared to a staggering 82.3%
Yep.
of non-disabled people. Again, I keep coming back to this, so that it's like Groundhog Day sometimes. That's a human right as well.
Absolutely, absolutely. And it's actually higher in Scotland than everywhere else in the UK.
Yep.
And that's something that we really, really need to address. So, it's really important that disabled people have an equal right, an equal chance of accessing public life, and including the right to work. So it's things like implementing a targeted strategy to support disabled people into work with specialist support. Also, raising employers' awareness of the Access to Work scheme, and making it much easier to access and making it faster. Also introducing things like adjustment passports to record the adjustments and kind of modifications and equipment that a disabled person has received, just to make sure that access to work support and equipment kind of stays with them if they change jobs and they don't have to go through the whole process again. Just those sorts of things are really important to implement. I'd be interested to hear as well what you think would help.
Daniel, what needs to be done to this? Because disability is only a label. There's a person behind that label.
Yeah. No, I completely agree, and this is why the Scottish Conservatives want to introduce a Help to Work scheme that offers that tailored support to disabled people to get back to stay in employment as well. So making sure that support doesn't end when a disabled person gets into employment, but actually that support stays to ensure that they do stay in employment. It's also important to work with businesses on this. I think it's, businesses are losing out if we don't get more disabled people into work. And actually, the level of talent that's being lost because of that is immense. So I think through our Help to Work scheme, this is something that will help more disabled people get back into work, and will give that agency kind of moving forward.
Maggie?
Thanks very much for the question. We have to close the disability employment gap. That's clear. Scottish Greens want to do that by improving access to specialist employability services that are run by experienced and trusted third sector and community and public organisations, not by private profiteers. We need to take action. We need to ensure that those organisations are funded effectively and have long-term sustainable funding. We also want to ensure that every large employer that is publicly funded, that gets contracts through either national or local government, takes part in the Disability Guaranteed Interview Scheme, and also through the Fair Work agenda, make sure that every employer has access to support for employing and keeping disabled people in employment. I think part of that means flexible working, like flexible hours, making sure that the work that is done suits the person that is being employed, and it isn't a one-size-fits-all. We want to continue to call for the devolving of access to work to the Scottish Parliament. At the moment it is reserved, but we want it devolved so we can co-design it with disabled people and have additional support for learning as well. But I think I'll leave it there.
Oliver?
Yeah, and so it's easy to say reasonable adjustments. Reasonable adjustments get people into the workplace. I have been really lucky with the employers I've had in the NHS that generally people are aware of what reasonable adjustments are and can help me get it. Even that is exhausting. And I know I don't need to, this is not a room where I need to tell you how exhausting it is fighting constantly for the things you are entitled to. Reasonable adjustments are great, but then the TUC, the Trade Union Congress, in a recent bit of research found that 7%, or rather the respondents to the research they did, only 7% felt that their employers properly understood what reasonable adjustments were and how to go about doing it. And so every time you move jobs, every time you move, and doctors rotate a lot, you have to re-fight that fight, and it is exhausting, and it shouldn't be about the individual disabled person having that fight every single time, because it feels like a fight when it shouldn't, because this is something you are legally entitled to. Access to work can sometimes exacerbate that problem, because if it's felt that, oh, well, this is under access to work, so therefore I don't need to pay for your reasonable adjustments, it needs to come out your access to work money, which is absolute nonsense. Your employer is still legally liable for your reasonable adjustments. This is where we've got to get it right. We need to take that responsibility off of the disabled person who just wants to get into work and be able to be living their life and doing their thing. It should be the job of government to make sure that all of the barriers that are there to the education around reasonable adjustments, to the assessment of them, and to the implementation of those reasonable adjustments is all done without the disabled person having to fight for any of it, without them really having to be pushing that at all. That should all happen for you, which is why I was really interested to hear earlier about the work that Inclusion Scotland is doing around the intern programme, where it takes some of that, where people who really, a DPO that really understands the issues and the process and the responsibilities and where responsibility lies, can be funded by central government to take that pressure off of the interns, allowing them to get the most out of the internship and the job in the workplace and to be most valuable to that workplace in turn. So that's where I think we're getting it wrong at the moment, and that's where I think we could do better.
Okay, thanks. Open up to the floor. We've got a few hands here. I wonder why, because it's a big issue. So, yeah, we'll take you from the front. Sorry, it was the...
Hello, thank you. Basically, what I want to know is, when people go for a job interview, the disabled will say, we don't want you here. Do you think companies, right, there should be a law to say that it's discriminating, we've got to stop discriminating people, and we should have a law on that. So if you were selected, would you make sure there was a law?
Daniel, I'll start with you here, because that's a fair point that you've made, because a lot of people has got qualifications but still can't get jobs.
Yeah.
What can we do better about that? Because I feel as though that employers see people in wheelchairs and automatically they think of different excuses to employ them.
Yeah, absolutely. And yet again, you won't be surprised for me to say, the idea of any discrimination in that regard is unacceptable. I think we need to do a lot more around education. It keeps coming back to education, making sure that there's that awareness amongst businesses. And like I mentioned earlier, the idea, if a disabled person isn't getting into employment, that's talent lost to the employer themselves as well. So it's really, really important that we take active steps to make sure that education is there, to make sure we are getting more disabled people into the workplace. There has been a decrease over the last year, and that is unacceptable to me. We need to provide that active support to make sure that we increase that as we move forward and work with employers to do so.
Right, I saw a few other hands going up, and there we go, to the front.
Thanks. I think none of the panel have really pointed out that we live in an incredibly competitive labour market, and you're expecting disabled people to compete against people without disabilities. And I think that's incredibly challenging. It's like putting a Paralympian in an Olympic race and expecting them to beat all the Olympians. I'm better qualified than virtually all my friends. I've struggled to get work more than any of my friends without disabilities. I think it's correct, Maggie. The Disability Confidence Scheme does not guarantee a job interview if you meet the minimum criteria. I wondered what the panel think, what we can learn from other countries like China, who offer tax incentives to employ disabled people, or Germany, who have a quota system, or the Scandinavian countries that offer wage subsidies and more flexible working.
Before we come back to the panel, just got another point at the front here, if that's, yeah. And then we'll come back to
Yeah, I have a question that's related to access to work. So if I'm applying for access to work, I have to wait for over 6 months to get a response, and that's a real issue for me, because I need that funding for communication, for technology, and the fact that I have to wait over 6 months means that a lot of people aren't willing to hire me because they can just hire somebody else that's able to do that job in the meantime. So I think for disabled people, it's almost impossible to achieve jobs because they're unable to do the job without access to work, and they're having to wait such a long time. So yeah, I think that that's a point I want to raise, and maybe that's something that can be improved in the future.
I mean, absolutely, and I know there has been a number of schemes actually that have been done. For example, the Conservatives in England talked about reduced help with national insurance contributions to get people with mental health issues back into employment. There's lots of different ways we can look at this, but fundamentally, I think it's about educating employers that actually, getting more disabled people into employment is actually, the amount of talent that they're missing out on. If disabled people aren't getting into employment is massive. So I think that's really, really important. I think your idea around incentivizing, that's something that's interesting. You're probably going to get sick of me saying this is an interesting idea and I'll look at it. But these are all really, really good ideas that I'm hearing, and it's something that I'm going to take away and definitely look at.
Okay, thanks. Sorry, I think one more. And then I'll go to Heather, because I'm cautious that we haven't heard from people online yet. We're not ignoring you. We're so busy with points tonight yet, but I'll take you first. Thanks.
Okay, thank you very much. My name is Keith Watson. I got a disability with Down syndrome Scotland, because I think we should be able to break barriers and do things with ourselves. But for work, we could do some volunteering work. People who don't have time to do any work. I want to see people with help other people around the world, each other people in the community, the public, and extremely exciting, and people have courage and speak out. Thank you.
Maggie?
Thanks for that, and I'll pick some of that up. And I think your point about the difference between paid work and volunteering is an important one. So often people want to be able to do both, and yet our social security system doesn't allow that in many situations. I think, unfortunately, this element of social security is not devolved to the Scottish Parliament. So, but I wish that we could have a sort of a staged or a phased approach for that shift away from job seeker support into employment support for people. At the moment, that doesn't exist, and I think there's a definite need for that. Just a couple of points about the access to work. I think one of the reasons why we are so keen to devolve or see the access to work scheme and the employability functions of Job Centre Plus devolve to Scotland is we could do away with some of the issues that you've described. We could co-design it with disabled people's organisations, with your lived experience, and get it right, get it better, to working here, to deliver high-quality integrated employment. And just very quickly, Stephen, you talked about the Disability Confidence Scheme. Yeah, you're right, that doesn't guarantee a job interview, but I was talking about the Disability Guaranteed Interview Scheme. And if interviews are not guaranteed, then they should be come back. And I think we might talk about legal aid reform later on. But I think one of the things we need to make sure is that everybody has access to redress when things don't go right, when disabled people are excluded from interviews, even though they shouldn't be, there should be access to redress. At the moment, our legal aid system largely does not provide that.
Thanks, Maggie. We've got a point, one more point, yeah.
Thank you so much. Thank you. One of our online viewers, Kate, has asked, how will you ensure lifelong learning for people with disabilities, especially those with higher support needs?
Absolutely. No, I think this is really, really important, and it's something I actually benefited from. I went through adult education when I was 21, and through that I ended up going through to get a PhD. So I'm very grateful for that, and I want to spread that across. Look at how we can make that opportunities more available to people moving forward. I think specifically for those with additional learning needs, we need to look at what works best for them. And really listen to their voices. We talked about lived experience. I think it's about listening to them and making sure their voices are coming through. One of the things we are looking at is a national review of mainstreaming, additional support needs for pupils within schools, but obviously we need to expand that out to long-term learning. But obviously the implementation of mainstream hasn't necessarily worked for many pupils as well. So we need to think about how we look at this, but yeah, moving forward we will.
Okay, thanks. We've got 3 more questions to fit in. Can we do it? Yes, we can. Have we got any more points online? Because I don't want to ignore people online watching about the employment. Okay, that's fine, because they might turn off now because I'm ignoring them. I'm not.